Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
We've spent a couple of weeks trying to get him in here. He's with Hartree Partners. Edward Morse is absolutely definitive on hydrocarbons. Think of Daniel Yergin's The Prize. Ed Morse shows up about page 23 in The Prize from a few years ago. Definitive at Citigroup and, of course, now with Hartree Partners. When was the first time you were in Riyadh?
It was in the late 1970s.
With Faisal? With King Faisal?
Yes, but I didn't see him at that point in time.
What is the okay, fine, but what is the strongest difference now between the royalty of Riyadh as they look out at this maelstrom versus our stereotype of Saudi Arabia?
So the Saudis have come a long way. They're looking at how to keep public happy. They are trying to diversify their economy as quickly as they can. And it's looking to the future rather than building on the present or the past.
What is their relationship with Russia, this idea of OPEC plus? What's the distinction of that relationship?
The relationship is kind of critical. Think about where the Saudis are, where OPEC is. The Saudis have a production capacity today between 11 and 12 million barrels a day. That's what they had in 1980.
Wow.
1980 was a long time ago. OPEC's production capacity then was around 33 million barrels a day. Today it's 36 million barrels a day. The oil market was then 60 million barrels a day, and today it's 100 million a day. So they discovered that they could not on their own balance the market. They could not put a floor under prices, and they needed to expand. And they had the opportunity to do so in the middle of the last decade when we had volatility across the planet. And a lot of that volatility was a result of the two fastest growing oil producing countries in the world, Russia and the United States. They were looking in the middle of the last decade, actually around 2013, just at the time before Russia had its first invasion of Ukraine, and they saw that the production growth was 1 million barrels a day in both countries. If you look back a couple of years, and they decided to bring prices down. They thought if they could bring prices down to around $70 a barrel, they would see the world lose 2 million barrels a day of oil, and it didn't happen.
Paul, I want to mention this. Everyone was looking for 100, 110, 120.
Yeah, sure.
And there was a lone voice at Citigroup, a bit grizzled. I mean, Edward Morse, a bit older, saying, maybe not. He nailed the move to 70.
So, Ed, how do you think about Russia as a global supplier these days? Because it seems like just in the last few days, things are changing when you think about the Trump administration, how they're viewing Russia. Do you expect Russia to be a bigger global supplier? I'm not sure where that oil went in the first place.
It all depends on when you're talking about, what your horizon is and what could possibly happen. And you have to remember that it wasn't that long ago. It was 2019 when Putin visited Russia, visited Saudi Arabia right after the attack on the Apcake facility, and said, listen, we're going to be cooperating with you through your Aramco IPO, and then we're going to be out on our own. And Sechin, the CEO of Rosneft, said, right after that IPO, we're out on our own. We are going to be growing oil production at home and abroad. They have right now the Vostok field in northern Siberia, and that field it's scheduled to produce 2 million incremental barrels a day. They are awash in oil, and they need to do something about it.
So President Trump says, drill, baby, drill, and we don't want to waste time on that. But what we can state with Edward Morse is oil a weapon for the United States in our geopolitics?
Oil is certainly an important part of the foreign policy in the country. It cannot be weaponized other than the degree to which you can put sanctions on a country. I don't know what weaponizing it means. I don't know what we're going to pursue energy dominance means. I know what it means as a soft, powerful instrument of policy. And let me give you an example. We have become the largest exporter of of energy in the world, the largest exporter of LNG. That LNG export growth enabled the United States to replace every drop of Russian energy, but particularly natural gas, going into Europe. And it did so at a time when it was able to globalize a gas market that had not been globalized. We have made oil, because we don't allow destination restrictions, we've enabled natural gas to be global, and the price of it is based at Henry Hub in the United States. That's kind of soft diplomacy. We have an ability to expand LNG globally, but it's a soft ability. We have an ability to say multilateral lending institutions ought to be pushing natural gas. They ought to be backstopping regasification. It's cleaner than coal. It's helpful to the global economy. But that's soft diplomacy. It's not using it as a weapon.
So talk to us about the demand side of the equation. I know when you think about some of these commodities like global oil, you really have to have a call on demand. What do you think demand is over the next year or two?
Brilliant question, but even more brilliant. Do you drive an EV?
I got to tell you, I did drive an EV until we moved back to New York full time. And then I discovered that it was too expensive to have a car to deal with actually the rush on garages right at the edge of the zone where New Yorkers didn't want to go south of.
So, coming up, Edward Morse on the congestion tax. Paul, continue with your good question.
So what is your demand view here over the next year or two?
So as we know, there's been a difference of demand views between people in this country, between OPEC and the EIA, OPEC and the IEA. Demand is kind of very simple if you look at it historically. We've had a regular drop in the oil intensity of GDP around the world, starting at the really end of the post-World War II growth of road transport in reconstructed Europe, reconstructed Japan, and in the interstate highway system in the U.S. We've had year after year a drop in the percentage of demand growth per unit of GDP growth. Now, that doesn't mean that oil demand comes to an end. It means it slows down.
Okay.
And to give you an example, if we go back to 1970, 71, for every 1% increase in the world in global oil demand and GDP, there was a 1.1, 1.2% increase in oil demand. Okay. Today it's about 0.3 to 1. So if we have 3% global GDP growth, we have 1 million barrels a day on a 1% base on a 100 million barrel a day market of oil demand. And that's continuing to slide. So think of it as we're not going to have much more than 1 million barrels a day demand growth.
We are thrilled to have with us today Edward Morse. Of course, you know him from Citigroup at Hartree Partners, now definitive on the geopolitics of oil and also, of course, pricing of oil. Do you have at Hartree, are you allowed to have a Brent guess? Do you have an oil barrel guess, or is it a folk spot?
No, it's not a problem. We live in the most volatile market the world has seen. Based on things that are out of our control. We don't know what's going to happen here and there. It's a relatively evenly balanced market, but for the fact that OPEC, going back to your first question, OPEC Plus has taken so much oil out of the market that it now amounts to 8 million barrels a day. That's a lot of shut-in production capacity that can come on. And if we look at the volatility today, we have prices going up in part because of the drone attacks on the CPC pipeline coming out of the Caspian, bringing Russian and Kazakh oil into the Mediterranean. We have an announcement from Kurdistan, from Baghdad, that the pipeline from Kurdistan through Turkey into the Mediterranean is going to be revived next week. That's going to we've lost maybe 300,000 barrels a day out of the CPC pipeline. We'll get perhaps 300,000 barrels a day out of Iraq unexpected by next week. So, given that volatility, we think oil is in a range. The range is 68 to 78.
I assume it's gauche, that's French, gauche of you to do buy, hold, sell right now. I don't want to buy, hold, sell on big oil, but how do you position big oil when I see Chevron announcing massive layoffs, massive restructure, and it's weak double-digit return over 30 years. Is big oil prosperous? Is it thriving? Is it the stereotype of our youth?
Well, as we know, some big oil is prospering and some big oil is not prospering. Maybe for some investments that they were making in the past, in the recent past, in the drive to go heavily into renewables and into things that weren't providing the same level of return. But look at the production growth of Chevron, the production growth of Exxon on a global platform based in part on the United States. They're increasing their output. They're increasing their output of oil and gas in a world in which they're very competitive.
Ed, talk to us. I'm watching the television show Landman, about the life in the oil patch in West Texas. So I now consider myself an expert on global oil and gas here. Talk to us about the U.S. We're now a net exporter of energy. What is our role in the global energy market vis-a-vis, say, maybe like an OPEC Plus or something?
We have transformed the energy markets of the world, including the oil market. If you go back to 2010, we were a gross importer and a net importer, and our production base, if you add NGLs and other liquids, was around 8 million barrels a day. The last month for which we have data, our production of liquids was 23 million barrels a day. We have moved from being the largest gross and net importer of the world to being the largest gross exporter. We export 16 to 17 million barrels a day of liquids. That's more than the combined exports of Russia and Saudi Arabia. Our production is more than the total production of Russia and Saudi Arabia combined. And we've become a net exporter on the order of magnitude of 4 million barrels a day. So that has made the basic difference in the global market. It's a wild difference. It's what gives the U.S. leverage.
I'd love to get you back in here on a 6-month, 3-month basis, Dr. Morse. Let me ask you one final question, and it's sort of from 60,000 feet and philosophical. How bad did Angela Merkel screw up? I mean, within the arch of Edward Morse's tenure, owning the high ground on this, how bad did German leadership screw up from Adenauer forward?
So my personal experience in it is dealing with the effort by Germany to become dependent on Russian gas. So I was in the State Department at the time that the big
serving
negotiations
both Carter and
took place.
Reagan.
And the U.S. and France were the only NATO countries that said, hey, you've got to look at, you Germany, have to look at dependence. Yes, you can import gas, but think about what it will do to your foreign policy. Think about what leverage you've lost in terms of that dependency, your inability to say no. And we saw that over time, and I think Germany has really learned that lesson in terms of being very reluctant as they go through this election process this coming Sunday. Almost all of the parties are reluctant to do more than say we might consider importing oil on a spot basis, but not on a full contract basis.
30 seconds. Does Tesla have a future?
I think EVs have a future. I'm not going to pick one versus another, but they're fun cars to drive. They're cleaner than other cars to drive, and they're getting more and more mileage. So if I were to buy a car again, I would certainly not hesitate to buy it.
There we are, the endorsement we need. Edward Morse, thank you so much. Thank you for joining Bloomberg and Bloomberg Surveillance today. Dr. Morse, of course, there in the tumult, the maelstrom that is oil today.